Hello, my dear friends. Take a slow breath and let the noise of today gently fade away. Tonight, we are not rushing anywhere. We are simply taking a slow walk into the past, into a place that was warm, crowded, noisy, and yet strangely comforting for the people who lived 1,000 years ago. Tonight, we are visiting a medieval tavern. Not the kind you see in movies, but the real kind, where everyday people came to eat, drink, talk, and rest their tired bodies after long days of work. Imagine you are walking along a narrow medieval street as evening begins to fall. The ground beneath your feet is uneven, made of packed dirt and stone. The air smells of smoke, animals, and damp wood. There are no bright lights, only the soft glow of torches and oil lamps coming from windows and doorways. Ahead of you, you notice a low wooden building with a wide door and warm light spilling out onto the street. This is the tavern. It does not look fancy. It does not look clean, but it looks alive. As you step closer, sounds begin to reach your ears. Low voices talking over one another, rough laughter, the scrape of wooden stools on the floor. Somewhere inside, a cup is set down heavily on a table. The tavern door stands open, not to invite elegance, but to invite anyone who needs food, drink, or company. Farmers, laborers, travelers, merchants, and sometimes soldiers all pass through this same doorway. For many, this place is the heart of social life. When you step inside, the first thing you feel is warmth. A fire burns somewhere in the room, filling the space with heat and smoke. The ceiling is low, darkened by years of soot. Wooden beams stretch overhead, thick and rough. The floor is hard and dirty, covered with straw to soak up spills. Nothing here is polished. Nothing is quiet. But everything feels real and lived in. The smell is strong and heavy. You smell ale, thick and sour. You smell bread, meat, sweat, smoke, and damp wool clothing. These smells mix together into something strange but familiar to medieval people. For them, this is the smell of comfort. This is the smell of being indoors, of being fed, of being among others after a long, tiring day. People sit close together on long wooden benches. Privacy does not exist here. Strangers share tables, cups, and space. Conversations overlap. Some people speak loudly, others lean in close to be heard. There is no music playing softly in the background, but sometimes someone hums a tune or taps a rhythm on the table. The tavern is not a place of silence. It is a place where the outside world finally loosens its grip. Most visitors are tired. Their hands are rough. Their clothes are worn and stained from work. A farmer might still smell of the field. A blacksmith carries the scent of metal and smoke. A traveler brings dust from the road. Everyone arrives carrying the weight of the day, and for a short while they are allowed to set that weight down. The tavern keeper moves slowly behind a rough wooden counter. This person knows everyone, or at least recognizes their faces. There is no menu written on a wall. What is available depends on the day, the season, and what could be made cheaply. You do not ask for choices. You accept what is given. And most of the time, what is given is ale. Ale is not a luxury here. It is safer than water, easier to store, and part of daily life. It is thick, cloudy, and weak by modern standards. Children drink it. Adults drink it. Everyone shares it. Cups are reused without washing. Hygiene is not a concern in the way we understand it today. Survival is. As you sit down on a bench, your body slowly relaxes. Not because the bench is comfortable, but because you are no longer working. You are no longer alone. The fire warms your face. The noise surrounds you like a blanket. For medieval people, this feeling matters deeply. Life is hard, uncertain, and physically demanding. Moments like this inside a tavern are small islands of rest. As the night grows a little darker outside, the tavern grows louder inside. More people arrive. More cups are filled. Stories are shared, exaggerated, and laughed over. News travels here faster than anywhere else. Rumors, gossip, and local problems are all discussed at these tables. The tavern is not just a place to drink. It is where the village breathes. As you imagine yourself sitting here, let your breathing slow. Let the warmth of the fire settle into your body. You are safe here for now, surrounded by voices and flickering light. In the next part, we will take a closer look at what people actually drank, how ale was made, and why medieval tavern drinks were very different from what we know today. For now, remain still. Let the tavern noise soften in your mind. Let the night continue quietly. As you slowly push open the heavy wooden door of the medieval tavern, the first thing you notice is not what you see, but what you feel. The air inside is warmer than the street outside, thick with smoke from the hearth and the soft smell of cooked food. The door closes behind you with a dull sound, and the noise of the outside world fades away. Inside, time seems to move more slowly. This is a place where people come not to rush, but to pause, to sit, and to let the long day gently loosen its grip. Imagine standing still for a moment just inside the doorway. Your eyes need time to adjust to the dim light. Candles flicker on rough wooden tables, and the fire in the hearth glows softly, casting moving shadows on the walls. The ceiling is low, made of dark wooden beams stained by years of smoke. Nothing here is polished or clean in a modern sense, but everything feels familiar and worn, shaped by thousands of evenings just like this one. The sound inside the tavern is calm but constant. Quiet conversations drift through the room. Someone laughs softly in a corner. Wooden cups are set down on tables with gentle thuds. There is no loud music, no sudden noise. The sounds blend together into a low, steady hum that feels almost comforting. It is the sound of people resting after work, sharing the same space without needing to speak loudly. As you take a few steps inside, you notice the floor beneath your feet. It is uneven, worn smooth in some places and rough in others. Straw is scattered across it to soak up spills and dirt. This is normal here. No one pays it any attention. The tavern is not meant to be perfect, it is meant to be used. Every mark on the floor and every scratch on the tables tells a quiet story of the people who have passed through. The smell of the tavern settles around you slowly. You can sense bread, ale, and something simmering in a pot near the fire. It is not a sharp smell, but a soft one, mixed with smoke and wood. For many medieval people, this smell is comforting. It means warmth, food, and company. It means the day's labor is finished, at least for now. You look around and see the people inside. Farmers with tired faces sit next to travelers wrapped in dusty cloaks. Craftsmen rest their hands on the table, their fingers still marked by work. No one stares for long. A quick glance is enough. In a medieval tavern, strangers are common and curiosity is gentle, not sharp. Everyone is here for the same reason, to rest. The tavern keeper moves slowly behind a rough wooden counter, wiping cups and pouring drinks with practiced ease. There is no hurry in their movements. They have done this work many times before. night after night. The rhythm of the tavern is familiar to them. They know when to speak and when to let silence remain. As you finally choose a place to sit, the bench feels hard beneath you but solid. This is not a place designed for comfort. Yet the feeling of being indoors, near warmth, surrounded by quiet human presence brings its own kind of ease. Your body begins to relax not because the furniture is soft, but because the space feels safe and shared. As the night grows quieter inside the tavern, conversations slow even more. Some people simply sit and stare into their cups. Others listen without speaking. There is no pressure to entertain or impress. The tavern allows people to exist together without effort. This is one of its quiet purposes. Imagine yourself sitting there now, the fire glowing gently, the air warm, the sounds soft and steady. In the next part, we will slowly explore what people drank in medieval taverns, how ale was made, and why it was such an important part of daily life. For now, remain still. Let the feeling of this quiet room settle around you. Let the warmth and the low sounds carry you gently toward rest. As you spend more time inside the medieval tavern, you begin to notice how important food and drink are to this place, not as luxury, but as comfort. The tavern is not a restaurant as we know it today. There are no menus, no choices written down, and no rush to be served quickly. Food appears slowly, prepared earlier in the day or even the day before. Large pots sit near the fire, keeping simple meals warm. Thick stews made from grains, vegetables, and whatever meat was available are the most common offering. The smell is heavy and earthy, filling the air and mixing with smoke and damp wood. Eating here is not about taste alone. It is about filling the body and quieting hunger after long, tiring days. Bread is everywhere. Rough, dark bread made from barley or rye is torn by hand and shared across tables. It is dense and filling, sometimes hard around the edges, sometimes soft in the middle. People dip it into stew or use it to scoop up food from wooden bowls. Plates are rare. Fingers do most of the work. No one seems bothered by this. This is normal. Food is eaten slowly between conversations, laughter, and long silences. Meals stretch out, not because people are relaxed, but because there is nowhere else to go and nothing else demanding attention. Drink flows more freely than food. Ale and beer are the heart of the tavern. Water is often unsafe, so most people drink ale daily, even children in weaker forms. The ale is thick, cloudy, and warm, stored in barrels behind the counter. It tastes different every time, depending on who made it and how long it has sat. There is no concern for consistency. Drinking is not about getting drunk quickly. It is about comfort, warmth, and easing the body after work. Mugs are passed, refilled, and shared without much thought. Spills are common. Laughter follows. As the hours pass, the tavern slowly changes. Early in the evening, it is filled with workers finishing their day. Later, it becomes quieter in some corners and louder in others. Some people grow sleepy, leaning against walls or resting their heads on tables. Others grow more talkative, telling the same stories they have told many times before. There is no clock on the wall. Time is measured by the fire burning lower and the sound of voices rising and falling. The tavern keeper moves calmly through the space, watching quietly, knowing most of the faces. There is no rush to close early. As long as people remain peaceful, the night continues. This place is not elegant or clean, but it feels alive. It holds the tired, the lonely, the bored, and the social, all together under one roof. The tavern does not judge. It simply exists, offering warmth, food, and company in a cold and uncertain world. As you imagine sitting here surrounded by low light and slow movement, notice how steady everything feels. There is no hurry, no pressure, just the gentle rhythm of voices, mugs, and firelight. In the next part, we will slowly explore the people themselves, the different types of visitors you might find in a medieval tavern, and how their lives quietly cross paths in this shared space. For now, remain still. Let the warmth settle around you. Let the night inside the tavern grow calm and familiar. As you spend more time inside the medieval tavern, your attention slowly turns to the food and drink that fill the space with heavy smells and quiet comfort. Meals here are not prepared with care or beauty, but with practicality and routine. The food is simple, filling, and meant to quiet hunger rather than delight the senses. Large pots sit near the fire, bubbling slowly through the evening and sometimes through the entire night. Stews made from grains, vegetables, and whatever meat is available are served again and again, ladled into wooden bowls that have seen years of use. Bread is thick and rough, often stale, but dipped into warm liquid, it becomes easier to eat. There is no menu and no choice. You eat what is available, and you eat when it is served. The tavern keeper does not ask questions or make suggestions. Food appears when it appears, and guests accept it without comment. Eating is a quiet act, done slowly, sometimes alone, sometimes among strangers sitting close enough to share warmth. Conversation during meals is low and scattered. Most people focus on filling their stomachs after long days of labor, travel, or waiting. Drink plays an even larger role in the tavern's life. Water is unsafe in many places, so most people drink weak beer or ale, even children. The drink is cloudy, slightly sour, and far from strong, but it is reliable. It is poured into heavy cups and refilled without ceremony. Drinking here is not about excitement or excess. It is about habit. People sip slowly, letting the warmth settle into their bodies. The rhythm of drinking matches the rhythm of the tavern itself, unhurried and steady. As the evening stretches on, mugs are lifted and set down again and again. The sound becomes familiar, almost comforting. There is no rush to finish. Time in the tavern moves differently. Outside, the world may be dangerous or demanding, but inside, everything slows. The fire crackles softly. Shadows move across the walls. People sit longer than they planned, not because they are entertained, but because leaving feels unnecessary. The tavern keeper watches quietly, moving between tables, refilling cups, collecting coins, and keeping the peace. There is no friendliness expected, only order. Guests understand the unspoken rules. Voices stay low. Arguments are rare and discouraged. Everyone is tired in their own way, and the tavern exists as a place where tiredness is accepted without explanation. As you imagine sitting here, eating slowly, drinking steadily, notice how the scene feels heavy but calm. Nothing dramatic happens. Nothing exciting unfolds. The tavern is not a place of adventure. It is a place of pause, a place where bodies rest, minds soften, and time passes without demand. As the night grows quieter, the food cools, the drinks slow, and the room settles into a deeper stillness. In the next part, we will gently explore the people who gather here, their quiet stories, and the unspoken connections formed in this dim space. For now, remain still. Let the warmth of the tavern linger in your imagination. Let the quiet deepen. Let rest continue gently, in its own time. As the night moved deeper and the hours stretched on inside the medieval tavern, the energy slowly began to change. Earlier sounds of laughter and conversation softened into lower voices and longer pauses between words. The air grew warmer and heavier, filled with smoke, spilled drink, and the scent of cooked food that had long since cooled. People no longer stood as often. They leaned against tables, walls, or one another, letting tired bodies rest where they could. The tavern was not a place of constant excitement. It was a place where the day slowly drained away, 1 hour at a time. Many of the people inside had worked since sunrise. Farmers, laborers, messengers, craftsmen, and travelers all carried fatigue in their shoulders and legs. The tavern gave them a place to stop moving. Sitting on rough benches, they stretched sore backs and rested aching feet. The drinks were not meant to make them feel powerful or wild. They were meant to make the body feel heavy enough to relax. As cups emptied and refilled more slowly, eyes grew softer, and movements became less careful. Conversation at this hour was quieter and more personal. Stories repeated themselves. The same memories surfaced again and again, told with small changes each time. No one rushed these moments. Time inside a medieval tavern did not move quickly. There were no clocks on the wall. Night was measured by the fading fire and the growing tiredness in the room. People spoke when they felt like it, and sat in silence when words no longer mattered. Some guests rested their heads on their arms, eyes half closed, not fully asleep but no longer fully awake. This was common. The tavern did not demand alertness. It allowed people to drift. The warmth of the room, the low sound of voices, and the steady flicker of firelight made it easy to let go. Even strangers felt familiar after hours spent together. The sharp edges between people softened as the night grew older. The tavern keeper moved more slowly now, collecting empty cups, wiping tables, and adding small pieces of wood to the fire. There was no rush to close at a strict hour. The night ended naturally when the room grew quiet enough. Some guests would sleep where they sat, especially travelers who had nowhere else to go. Others would stand slowly, stretching stiff limbs, preparing to step back into the dark streets. Leaving the tavern did not feel dramatic. There was no announcement or final moment. People simply faded away one by one. A nod here, a quiet goodbye there. Outside, the air felt cooler and cleaner after the heavy warmth inside. The sounds of the tavern grew distant quickly, swallowed by the quiet of the sleeping town. As you imagine this late hour, notice how calm it feels. The tavern is no longer loud or crowded. It is simply a place where tired people rested together before returning to their lives. This was the true heart of a medieval tavern. Not noise or chaos, but shared exhaustion and simple comfort at the end of a long day. As the night grows quiet now, allow this image to soften and fade. Let your body remain still. Let your breathing slow gently. Allow rest to continue, just as it did for those who sat inside taverns centuries ago, waiting for the night to pass. As the evening deepened and the night slowly wrapped itself around the medieval town, the tavern began to change its feeling in quiet, gentle ways. The early visitors who had come for food and warmth after a long day of work slowly finished their meals and drifted away into the darkness. Their places were taken by others who preferred the night, people who moved more slowly, spoke more softly, and seemed in no hurry to leave. The fire burned lower now, not roaring, but glowing steadily, casting long shadows that moved lazily across the wooden walls. The air felt warmer and heavier, filled with the smell of smoke, ale, and worn wood that had absorbed years of voices and stories. Inside the tavern, time felt different. There were no clocks, no clear sense of hours passing. Conversation rose and fell like a slow tide. Some tables grew quieter, with people sitting close together, speaking in low voices or simply listening. Others grew louder for a moment, then settled again. Laughter came softly now without the sharp edge it had earlier. Even movement slowed. Servers walked more carefully between benches, and mugs were refilled less often, not because people wanted less, but because the night itself encouraged patience. Music, if it appeared at all, was simple and unplanned. A traveler might hum a tune, or someone might tap gently on the table in rhythm. There were no performances meant to impress. Everything felt casual, unimportant, and human. This was not entertainment meant to be remembered. It was sound meant to fill space and make the night feel less empty. Many people listened without really focusing, letting the noise blend into the background as their thoughts drifted. As the night grew longer, tiredness became visible. Shoulders slumped, heads leaned closer to tables. Some people rested their arms and stared into the fire without speaking. This kind of tiredness was accepted and expected. No one rushed anyone out. Falling quiet was not rude. It was simply part of the night. In a medieval tavern, rest did not wait for home. It happened wherever the body finally allowed it. The tavern keeper watched all of this with calm familiarity. This rhythm of the night was known well. There was no need to hurry the evening along. The keeper knew who would leave soon, and who would stay until the fire burned low. This knowledge came from years of observing the same slow pattern night after night. The tavern was not just a business at this hour. It was a shelter, a pause between the day that had ended and the sleep that had not yet arrived. For travelers, this late hour felt especially comforting. Roads at night were dark and uncertain, and the tavern offered a safe place to remain still. Sitting near the fire, surrounded by strangers who shared the same need for warmth and rest, created a quiet sense of security. Words were no longer necessary. Simply being present was enough. Even strangers felt familiar after hours spent in the same dim light. As you imagine yourself sitting there now, notice how calm it feels. The bench beneath you is hard but steady. The warmth from the fire reaches your hands. The sounds around you blur into a soft background hum. Nothing is expected of you. You do not need to speak or move. You are simply there, sharing the night with others who are just as tired. As the night grows quieter still, the tavern slowly prepares for rest. The fire is tended gently. Conversations fade into silence. The building itself seems to breathe, settling into the darkness. In the next part, we will gently explore how sleep happened in and around the tavern, and what it felt like to finally rest after a long medieval night. For now, remain still. Let the quiet deepen. Let rest continue in its own time. As the night inside the medieval tavern slowly deepened, the feeling of the space began to change. Earlier laughter softened into quieter voices, and movement became slower and heavier. The air remained warm, thick with the smell of ale, smoke, and cooked food, but now it carried a sense of tiredness. People leaned more heavily on tables and walls. Conversations stretched out with longer pauses between words. No one was in a hurry to leave, because the tavern was often warmer and safer than the streets outside. This was not a place that closed early. It stayed awake as long as the people inside needed it. Candles burned lower, their light flickering softly against wooden beams and rough stone walls. Shadows moved gently across the room, making everything feel slightly unreal, as if the night itself had entered the tavern. The floor was sticky from spilled drink and tracked dirt, but no one seemed to mind anymore. Boots dragged instead of stepped. Benches creaked as bodies shifted into more comfortable positions. Some people rested their heads on their arms, not fully asleep, but no longer fully awake either. The sounds of the tavern changed as well. Earlier noise gave way to a low, steady hum. A few voices murmured quietly. Someone coughed. Someone laughed softly at a story already told many times. In one corner, a man might still be speaking, not realizing that most people had stopped listening. In another, a group sat in silence, simply enjoying the warmth and the presence of others. Silence was not uncomfortable here. It felt earned, like the natural end of a long day. Drinking slowed, but it did not stop. Cups were refilled more carefully now, with less excitement and more routine. Ale was sipped rather than swallowed quickly. For many people, this was the last comfort before returning to cold homes, shared sleeping spaces, or even the open street. The tavern offered a few more moments of ease, a few more minutes of being surrounded by life. Some people began to doze where they sat. Sleep in a medieval tavern was not unusual. A head might drop forward, a body leaning sideways against a wall or another person. No one made a fuss about it. This kind of half-sleep was common, especially for travelers or laborers who had nowhere else to rest. The tavern keeper might watch quietly, deciding who could be left alone and who needed a gentle nudge awake before closing time. Outside, the world had grown darker and quieter. Inside, the tavern remained a small island of warmth and human presence. The contrast made the space feel even more comforting. For a brief moment, nothing else mattered. Not tomorrow's work, not unpaid debts, not the hard life waiting outside the door. Just this slow, fading night. As you imagine sitting here, notice how the scene gradually softens. The edges blur. The room feels less defined. Your body feels heavier, calmer, less alert. This is how many nights ended in a medieval tavern, not with drama or noise, but with tired bodies and quiet minds drifting toward rest. As the night grows quiet, let us allow this scene to fade gently. Remain still. Let the warmth linger. Let rest continue in its own slow time. As the night stretched deeper inside the medieval tavern, time itself seemed to slow down. There were no clocks on the walls, no clear sense of hours passing. The only measure of time came from the steady burning of candles, the gradual lowering of voices, and the growing heaviness in the air. Smoke from the hearth mixed with the smell of ale, sweat, and damp clothing, creating a thick atmosphere that settled into the lungs. For many people, this was not unpleasant. It felt familiar. After long days of labor, this crowded, noisy space offered something rare, a pause from responsibility. People did not rush through the night. Drinking was slow and steady. Ale was sipped, not swallowed quickly, partly because it was filling, and partly because it was often the safest drink available. Water was risky, but ale was trusted. The taste was rough and uneven, sometimes sour, sometimes weak, but always warm. As mugs were refilled, conversations drifted without direction. Stories were told again and again, changing slightly each time. No one seemed to mind the repetition. Familiar words were comforting in a world where very little felt stable. The tavern was one of the few places where different parts of medieval society briefly mixed. Farmers sat near merchants. Travelers shared benches with locals. Sometimes a soldier passed through, sitting quietly, drinking without speaking much. Status mattered less here, especially late at night. Dirt-stained hands rested beside cleaner ones. Everyone smelled of the road or the fields. Everyone was tired. In this space, shared exhaustion mattered more than rank. As the night continued, movement slowed. Laughter softened. Arguments, if they happened, usually burned out quickly. People were too tired to stay angry for long. The warmth of the fire and the weight of food and drink made bodies heavy. Heads leaned back against wooden walls. Some people nodded off where they sat, mugs still in hand. Sleeping in a tavern was not unusual. Benches, floors, and corners were used when the night became too long to fight. Music, if present, was simple. A single instrument played quietly, repeating the same melody. The sound blended into the background, not demanding attention. It helped fill the silence when voices faded. For many, this sound was enough to relax the mind. There was no performance to watch, no expectation to clap. Music was part of the air, like the firelight and smoke. The tavern keeper moved slowly now, cleaning only what was necessary. Empty mugs were stacked. Spilled ale dried on the floor. There was no rush to close. The night belonged to the people inside. Outside, darkness wrapped the streets, making travel unsafe. Inside, the tavern felt like a small island of warmth and light, holding everyone together until morning. As you imagine sitting here, notice how the noise no longer feels sharp. It becomes distant, almost gentle. Voices blend together. The fire crackles softly. Your body feels heavy, supported by the bench beneath you. There is nowhere to go, nothing to do. Just the long medieval night, passing slowly inside a wooden room filled with tired people sharing the same quiet rest. As the night grows quieter, let this image soften. Let the sounds fade. Let the warmth remain. In the next part, we will gently move toward the early morning hours, when the tavern slowly empties and a new day begins outside its doors. For now, remain still. Let the quiet deepen. Let rest continue in its own time. As the night moved deeper inside the medieval tavern, the energy slowly began to change. Earlier sounds of laughter and conversation softened into quieter voices. Cups were still raised, but less often. The fire burned lower now, its light softer and more uneven, casting long shadows across wooden walls and rough tables. The air felt warmer and heavier, filled with the mixed smells of ale, smoke, and tired bodies. This was the hour when the tavern stopped feeling lively and began to feel slow, worn, and calm in its own rough way. People who remained at this hour were not in a hurry. Many had nowhere else to go. Travelers leaned back against walls, their cloaks pulled closer as their bodies relaxed. Locals rested their heads on tables, eyes half closed. Conversations drifting into silence. Words became slower and less clear. The mind loosened its grip on the day. This was not a planned moment of rest. but it became one naturally. Fatigue settled gently into muscles that had worked since sunrise. The tavern keeper moved more quietly now. There was less serving, more watching. Empty cups were collected slowly. The fire was adjusted just enough to keep warmth without brightness. No one wanted sudden light or sharp sound. Even footsteps softened. In this low-energy hour, the tavern became a place of shared tiredness rather than shared excitement. Sleep often began here without ceremony. Some people rested sitting upright on benches. Others slid down against walls or laid their heads on folded arms. There were no rules against it. Sleep was practical. If the body needed rest, it took it wherever it could. Snoring mixed gently with the crackle of the fire. No one complained. It was understood that long days led to heavy nights. For travelers, this late hour carried a strange comfort. The road was dark and unsafe, but inside the tavern warmth remained. Even if sleep was shallow and uncomfortable, it felt safer than the cold outside. Dreams came lightly, interrupted by sounds and movement, but rest still happened. The body accepted what it could get. As you imagine this scene now, let it slow inside your mind. The tavern is quieter. The fire is low. Voices fade into murmurs, then into silence. Bodies grow heavy. The night stretches without urgency. There is nothing left to do, nowhere left to go. Only rest, arriving on its own. Let your breathing stay slow. Let your body feel heavy like those tired travelers and locals who allowed sleep to come wherever they sat. As the medieval tavern settles into its final quiet hours, allow yourself to drift with it, gently and without effort. As the medieval tavern settled deeper into the night, everything around you began to slow in a way that felt heavy but calm. The rush of arrivals faded, and no new faces pushed through the door. Those who remained were not in a hurry to leave. The fire burned lower now, its light softer, casting long shadows across wooden walls darkened by years of smoke. The air felt warmer and thicker, filled with the mixed smells of ale, damp clothing, and old wood. This was the part of the night when time seemed to stretch, losing its sharp edges. People sat longer in their places, leaning into benches and walls that had supported tired bodies for generations. Conversations grew quieter and slower, not because anyone was trying to be polite, but because energy was fading naturally. Words were chosen with less care. Laughter softened into tired smiles. Some voices drifted off mid-sentence, not finished, but not needing to be. The tavern did not demand attention anymore. It simply existed, holding everyone inside it. Drinks continued to be poured, but less often now. Mugs were refilled slowly, sometimes only halfway, just enough to keep hands warm and mouths moist. The ale itself tasted heavier late at night, as if it carried the weight of the hours inside it. People drank not to celebrate anymore, but to remain comfortable where they sat. Standing up felt like effort. Leaving felt unnecessary. In one corner, a traveler rested with his head against the wall, eyes half closed, listening without really hearing. Nearby, two locals sat side by side in silence, no longer speaking, but not apart either. Silence in a medieval tavern was not uncomfortable. It was familiar. After long days of labor and long years of hard living, silence felt earned. The night allowed it. The tavern keeper moved more slowly now, wiping the counter with unhurried strokes. There was no rush to close, no strict hour when the night had to end. As long as the fire still burned and people remained calm, the tavern stayed open. This place was not just for drinking, it was shelter from the dark, from the cold, and from empty roads outside. Outside, the town had gone quiet. Streets that had once echoed with footsteps were now still. Inside the tavern, that quiet felt distant and unimportant. The thick walls kept the night away. The low ceiling made the space feel smaller, safer. The tavern became its own world, separate from time. As the hours passed, some people finally stood, stretching stiff limbs, paying quietly, and slipping out into the darkness. Others remained, too tired to move, too comfortable to care. A few might sleep right there, heads on tables, wrapped in cloaks, trusting the tavern to hold them until morning. For many medieval people, this was the closest thing to rest before sleep. Not a bed, not a quiet room, but this shared space where effort stopped, and the body slowly gave up its tension. The tavern allowed that release. It asked nothing in return. As you imagine sitting there now, feel how heavy your body becomes. The warmth, the low light, the slow passing of time. Nothing needs to happen. Nothing needs to be decided. The night can stretch on quietly. As the night grows deeper, let the tavern fade softly into the background. Let the sounds blur together. Let the fire dim. Let your breathing slow. For now remain still. Let the quiet deepen. Let rest continue in its own time. As the evening slowly turned into night, the medieval tavern changed its feeling without anyone announcing it. The door still opened and closed, but less often now. The air felt thicker, warmer, filled with the steady mix of smoke, ale, and human presence. Candles burned lower, their flames softer and less bright, casting longer shadows along the wooden walls. The sounds inside did not disappear, but they softened. Laughter became slower. Voices dropped in volume. Conversations stretched out with long pauses between words, as if everyone inside was settling into the rhythm of the night. People who had arrived earlier now sat more comfortably in their places, leaning into benches and tables worn smooth by years of use. Movements became heavier and slower. Mugs were lifted with less urgency, set down more carefully. The body, tired from a full day of work, began to sink into rest even while sitting upright. This was not a place for rushing anymore. The tavern, at this hour, encouraged stillness. It invited people to stay exactly where they were. Stories told at night were different from those shared earlier. They were longer, calmer, and less focused on excitement. A traveler might describe a road slowly, mentioning weather, fields, and the quiet moments between towns. A local might talk about old winters, poor harvests, or small changes noticed over the years. These stories were not meant to impress. They were meant to pass time gently, to fill the space without demanding attention. Listeners nodded slowly, sometimes responding, sometimes simply listening while staring into the dim light. Food, if any remained, was eaten quietly. Bread was torn slowly, chewed without hurry. The tavern keeper moved at an easier pace now, wiping tables, checking fires, refilling jugs only when needed. There was no pressure to serve quickly. Night belonged to patience. Even strangers felt less separate, sharing the same tired calm, the same warm air, the same fading light. Outside, the village or town had grown quiet, but inside the tavern, life continued in a softer form. This was one of the few places where people could remain awake together after dark without purpose. No work was expected. No decisions needed to be made. For a short time, people were allowed to simply exist, warmed by drink, company, and familiarity. As you imagine sitting inside this medieval tavern, late into the night, notice how the energy slowly settles. There is no need to leave yet. There is no need to speak. Just the gentle hum of human presence, the low glow of firelight, and the quiet comfort of being somewhere shared. As the night grows quieter now, allow this image to soften and fade. Let your body remain still. Let your breathing slow naturally. Allow rest to continue gently, just as the tavern itself slowly drifts toward silence. As the night moved deeper and the hours passed quietly, the medieval tavern began to change its feeling. The early noise slowly faded, replaced by a softer, heavier calm. Voices lowered without anyone asking them to. Laughter became slower and less sharp. The fire in the hearth burned lower now, its light stretching longer shadows across wooden walls and worn floors. Smoke lingered gently in the air, mixing with the smell of ale, old wood, and damp cloaks drying near the warmth. This was the hour when the tavern no longer felt busy or alert, but tired and human, ready to rest. Many guests remained seated long after their cups were empty, not because they wanted more drink, but because the tavern offered something rare in medieval life, a place to pause. Outside, the streets were dark and uncertain. Inside, the fire still glowed, and the benches were familiar. People leaned forward, elbows on rough tables, heads resting on hands, listening more than speaking. Stories, if told, were quiet now. Short memories, half-finished thoughts. Words drifted slowly, then stopped. Silence did not feel uncomfortable. It felt earned. Some travelers prepared to sleep right where they sat. In medieval taverns, staying the night was common. There were few proper inns and fewer clean beds. If a traveler could pay a little extra, they might be allowed to stretch out near the fire or on a bench pushed against the wall. Cloaks became blankets. Bags became pillows. Boots were loosened, not removed completely, in case someone needed to move quickly. Sleep came easily after long roads and heavy days. It was not deep or perfect, but it was enough. For locals, this late hour was often the last moment of peace before another day of labor. Farmers, laborers, and craftsmen sat quietly, thinking about tomorrow without speaking it aloud. There was no planning in detail, only acceptance. Tomorrow would come the same way it always did. Work would begin early. The body would ache. Life would continue. The tavern offered a brief space where no one demanded effort. You could simply exist. The tavern keeper moved slowly now, clearing cups without hurry. There was no rush to close. Medieval nights were long, and people slept in broken stretches. Some would leave now, some later, some not until morning. The door opened less often. Each opening brought in a soft draft of cold air and the distant sound of empty streets. Then the door closed again, sealing warmth inside. As you imagine sitting here, feel how the night settles around you. The bench beneath you is hard but familiar. The fire crackles softly. Around you, breathing slows. The tavern feels less like a place of business and more like a shared shelter from the dark. No one expects anything from you. You do not need to speak, you do not need to move. As the night grows quiet, let us stay here a little longer. Let the fire burn low. Let the voices fade completely. Let rest arrive without effort, the same way it did for countless people who once sat in taverns just like this, 1,000 years ago. For now remain still. Let the quiet deepen. Let rest continue in its own time. As the night moved deeper and deeper, the medieval tavern began to change its feeling in a very quiet way. The noise that once filled the room slowly softened. Laughter became slower and heavier. Voices dropped lower, not because anyone asked them to, but because tired bodies naturally lost energy. The fire in the hearth still burned, but its flames were calmer now, glowing more than dancing. Shadows stretched longer across wooden tables and stone floors, making the room feel smaller and more enclosed. This was the hour when the tavern stopped being lively and started becoming sleepy, even if no one spoke of sleep out loud. People who had been sitting upright now leaned back or rested their arms on the table. Some stared into their cups without drinking, lost in quiet thought. Others spoke slowly, repeating the same stories they had already told earlier in the night. Travelers who had walked all day felt the weight of their bodies pressing down, their legs heavy, their shoulders aching. For them, the tavern was no longer a place of excitement. It became a place of rest, warmth, and stillness, even while they remained awake. The smells inside the tavern also changed as the night aged. Fresh food smells faded, replaced by the deeper scent of smoke, old wood, spilled ale, and damp clothing drying near the fire. These smells were not unpleasant to the people of the time. They were familiar and comforting, a sign that the night was safe and settled. The air felt thicker, warmer and slower, encouraging the body to relax without effort. Tavern workers moved more quietly now. Tankards were collected with less urgency. Tables were wiped slowly. The tavern keeper spoke fewer words, saving energy for the long day that would begin again at sunrise. There was no rush to close the tavern suddenly. Instead, the night ended gradually, allowing everyone inside to follow the same slow rhythm. This gentle ending helped people relax even more, knowing there was no sharp moment when warmth and safety would disappear. Some guests had already begun to sleep where they sat. Heads rested against walls or dropped forward onto folded arms. In medieval taverns, this was normal and accepted. No one complained. No one laughed. Sleep was seen as a natural part of the night. If someone slept sitting up, it meant the day had been long and the body needed rest. Others wrapped cloaks tighter around themselves, preparing to step back into the cold night outside once they felt ready. For many people, this moment inside the tavern was the calmest part of their day. Outside, medieval life was hard, loud, and uncertain. Inside, at this late hour, the world felt paused. The fire glowed steadily. The walls stood firm. Familiar faces rested nearby. Even strangers felt less threatening in this shared quiet. The tavern became less about drinking and more about simply existing together in warmth. As you imagine this scene now, picture yourself sitting quietly at a wooden table. The fire flickers softly. Your body feels heavy but safe. The noise has faded into a gentle hum. There is nothing left to do tonight. No decisions, no movement required. Just rest, warmth, and the slow passing of time. As the night grows quiet inside this medieval tavern, allow the image to soften and drift. Let your breathing slow naturally. Let your body remain still. In the next part, we will gently move toward the final moments before the tavern fully closes, and the medieval night carries everyone back into darkness and rest. For now remain still, let the quiet deepen, let rest continue in its own time. As the night moved deeper, the medieval tavern slowly changed its mood. The early energy began to fade, not suddenly, but gently, like a fire burning lower as the wood turned to embers. The loud voices softened. Laughter became slower and less frequent. Some guests leaned heavily against tables, their movements unsteady but calm. Others sat quietly, staring into their cups, lost in tired thoughts after long days of work and travel. The tavern at this hour felt less like a place of excitement and more like a resting space where the weight of the day could finally be set down. The air grew warmer as bodies stayed close together, and the fire continued to glow. Smoke hung low near the ceiling, drifting lazily and carrying the mixed smells of ale, sweat, wood, and cooked food. Candles burned unevenly, their wax slowly dripping down the sides, shadows moving gently across the walls. These shadows made the room feel alive but calm, as if the tavern itself was breathing slowly with everyone inside it. This soft movement made tired eyes heavier and thoughts slower. Many travelers who had arrived earlier now prepared to rest where they sat. In medieval taverns, it was common for people to fall asleep at tables or on benches, especially if they had no private room. Heads rested on folded arms. Cloaks were pulled closer for warmth. There was no embarrassment in this. Sleep came when it came, and the tavern accepted it quietly. The sounds of snoring mixed gently with the crackle of the fire and the low murmur of late conversation. Those who remained awake spoke more softly now. Stories became slower and less detailed. Words drifted instead of rushing. Sometimes conversations stopped entirely, replaced by comfortable silence. This silence was not awkward. It was shared and understood. Everyone was tired in the same way, carrying the same heaviness in their bodies. The tavern, once loud and busy, now felt like a shelter from the cold night outside. The tavern keeper moved quietly through the room, clearing empty cups, adjusting the fire, and checking doors. There was no rush to push people out. As long as the night remained calm, guests were allowed to stay. Safety mattered more than strict rules. Outside, the streets were dark and dangerous, and the tavern offered light, warmth, and company. For many, staying until morning felt safer than leaving. As the hour grew later, even the music faded. If there had been singing earlier, it now slowed into silence. Instruments rested against walls, untouched. The only sounds left were breathing, soft footsteps, and the gentle shifting of bodies trying to get comfortable. This quiet created a sense of peace that was rare in medieval life. The tavern became less a place of trade and more a shared resting space. Imagine yourself sitting there now, the warmth of the fire on your face, the noise of the world far away. Your body feels heavy. Your thoughts slow down. The bench beneath you is hard, but familiar. Around you, others rest in the same quiet way. No one expects anything from you. There is nowhere else to be. The night has claimed this moment. As the tavern settles into stillness, let this image soften in your mind. In the next part, we will gently explore what happened at dawn, when the tavern slowly woke again, and life began to move forward once more. For now, remain still. Let the quiet deepen. Let rest continue in its own time. As the medieval night stretched deeper, The tavern began to change its feeling without anyone needing to announce it. Earlier noise softened into low murmurs, and the heavy energy of movement slowly settled into stillness. The fire burned lower now, no longer crackling loudly, but glowing quietly and casting long shadows across wooden walls and worn floors. People who had been sitting upright earlier now leaned back or rested their heads against rough tables, their bodies heavy with tiredness and drink. Time in the tavern was not measured by clocks, but by the way the room slowly relaxed into the night. The smell of smoke, ale, and damp wool lingered in the air, becoming part of the atmosphere rather than something noticed. Breathing it in felt normal, almost comforting, because it meant warmth and shelter. Outside, the streets were dark and quiet, unsafe for travel, which made the tavern feel even more like a temporary refuge. No one was in a hurry to leave. The night belonged to rest now, not movement. Conversations faded into fragments. A few words here, a low laugh there, then long pauses of silence where nothing needed to be said. Medieval people were used to silence. It did not feel awkward. It felt natural. The tavern allowed this quiet to exist without pressure. Those who stayed awake watched the fire slowly change shape, while others slipped into light sleep right where they sat. Sleeping in public spaces like taverns was not unusual, especially for travelers and laborers. Rest came wherever the body finally relaxed. The innkeeper moved quietly now, clearing cups slowly, careful not to wake anyone who had drifted off. There was no rush to close in the modern sense. The tavern did not suddenly end its day. It simply softened into night. Benches became beds. Cloaks became blankets. The floor itself became a place of rest for those too tired to care. Comfort was simple, but exhaustion made it enough. As you imagine this moment, picture yourself sitting quietly in the corner of the tavern. The room is warm. The fire is low. The voices around you are soft and distant. No one expects anything from you. There is no need to move or speak. The long medieval day has ended, and the night has gently taken over. As the night grows quieter, let us pause here. For now, remain still. Let the tavern fade softly into darkness. Let rest continue in its own slow time, just as it did for countless travelers long ago. As the night stretched deeper inside the medieval tavern, time itself began to feel different. There were no clocks on the walls, no clear signals telling anyone when the night should end. The only measure of time was the slow burning of candles, the fading warmth of the fire, and the gradual softening of voices around the room. What had once been loud conversation turned into low murmurs. Laughter became quieter, slower, and less frequent. The tavern did not suddenly change its mood. It drifted into stillness little by little, just as the human body does when it grows tired. By this hour, most travelers had settled into their places. Some leaned against wooden tables, their heads resting on folded arms. Others sat on benches close to the fire, staring into the flames without really seeing them. The air was thick with the smell of smoke, spilled ale, and damp clothing drying slowly in the heat. Breathing felt heavier, slower, as if the room itself was encouraging rest. Even those who planned to stay awake felt their bodies growing heavy, pulled downward by fatigue they could no longer ignore. The tavern keeper moved more slowly now. There was no rush to serve quickly. Cups were refilled calmly, sometimes without words. The sound of wooden mugs touching tables echoed softly through the room. Footsteps on the stone floor were fewer and farther apart. Outside, the night had fully taken over. No daylight slipped through the windows. Only darkness pressed gently against the walls, reminding everyone that the world beyond the tavern had gone quiet. For many people, this was the closest thing they had to comfort. Homes were small and cold, roads were dangerous, inns were rare. The tavern, for this one night, became a shared shelter. Strangers rested near each other without fear, connected by nothing more than warmth, exhaustion, and the simple need to pause. No one asked questions. No one demanded stories. Silence became acceptable, even welcome. As fatigue deepened, bodies adjusted naturally. Cloaks were pulled tighter. Feet shifted closer to the fire. Heads tilted back against rough wooden walls. Sleep did not arrive all at once. It came in small waves, a few moments of awareness, followed by drifting. Eyes closed, then opened briefly, then closed again. This was normal. No one expected perfect sleep. Rest was enough. Some people eventually lay down on the floor using rolled cloaks or bags as pillows. The floor was hard but familiar. Many had slept on worse surfaces. The steady sounds of breathing around the room created a slow rhythm, almost like a shared heartbeat. The fire crackled softly, never loud enough to disturb, never quiet enough to disappear. This gentle noise helped the mind let go, just as running water or wind might do. Dreams, when they came, were simple and mixed with the sounds of the tavern. A laugh might blend into a dream. A shifting body might pull someone briefly awake. But there was no panic. Waking in the night felt normal. People adjusted and returned to rest without effort. There was no pressure to stay asleep. The night was long and there was time. As you imagine this moment now, picture yourself inside that tavern. The room is dim. The fire is low. The air is warm and heavy. Your body feels tired but safe. You are not required to speak or move. Nothing is expected of you. You can simply rest where you are, surrounded by the quiet presence of others doing the same. This was how many medieval nights ended. Not with beds or silence, but with shared stillness, with warmth instead of comfort, with acceptance instead of control. The tavern did not offer luxury, but it offered something just as important, a place where the body could finally stop. As the night continues to deepen, allow this image to soften and slow inside your mind. Let the sounds fade. Let the fire dim. Let your own breathing follow that same easy rhythm. For now, remain still. Let the night continue. Let rest settle naturally, just as it did inside those old wooden walls. As the evening in the medieval tavern slowly drifted toward night, the energy inside the room began to change in quiet and gentle ways. Earlier laughter softened into low conversation, and the sharp sounds of mugs hitting wooden tables became less frequent. The fire still burned, but its flames were calmer now, glowing more than dancing. Shadows stretched longer across the walls, and the smell of smoke, ale, and warm food blended into something familiar and heavy. People no longer arrived in groups. The door opened less often. Those who remained had mostly settled in for the night, leaning back, speaking slowly, and moving with tired ease. At this hour, the tavern felt less like a public place and more like a shared resting space. Travelers who had walked all day sat quietly, their bodies finally releasing the strain of the road. Local villagers stayed close to the fire, listening more than talking. Words became fewer, but more meaningful. Stories were told slowly. often repeating ones already heard many times before. No one seemed to mind. Familiar stories brought comfort, not boredom. They filled the silence without demanding attention. The tavern keeper moved more slowly now, no longer rushing between tables. He wiped down surfaces, adjusted the fire, and spoke in short, calm sentences. There was no pressure to sell more or keep the noise alive. The night had its own rhythm, and everyone followed it naturally. Even those still drinking did so gently, sipping rather than swallowing quickly. Ale was no longer about celebration. It was about warmth and ease. Some guests began to drift toward sleep right where they sat. Heads rested against walls or heavy arms folded on tables. In medieval taverns, this was normal. Not everyone had a room waiting upstairs. Many slept near the fire, wrapped in cloaks, trusting the presence of others to keep the space safe. The tavern was not just a place to drink. It was shelter, community, and rest all at once. Outside, the streets grew quiet. The sounds of the day faded, replaced by distant footsteps or the occasional animal call. Inside, the tavern felt sealed off from the world, held together by thick walls and shared warmth. The fire crackled softly, creating a steady sound that soothed tired minds. For many, this was the most peaceful part of the day. When work was done, hunger was eased, and nothing more was expected. As you imagine sitting in this tavern now, notice how the night feels heavy but calm. There is no rush to leave, no pressure to speak, no need to stay alert. The day has passed, and tomorrow can wait. The medieval tavern at this hour is not loud or wild. It is slow, dim, and deeply human, offering rest in a hard world. As the night grows quiet, allow this image to soften. Let the fire glow in your mind. Let the low voices fade into silence. Stay still. Let rest continue gently, just as it did for those who sat here long ago. As the medieval night grew deeper, the tavern began to change in a quiet and gentle way. The energy that once filled the room slowly softened. Voices that were once loud became lower and slower. Laughter faded into murmurs. The crackling fire remained steady, casting long shadows across wooden walls and worn tables. Some people leaned back in their seats, eyes half closed, while others rested their heads on folded arms. The tavern was no longer a place of movement and noise. It became a place of waiting, where the night itself seemed to settle among the people. Those who remained were often the ones with nowhere else to go. Travelers waiting for morning light, locals avoiding cold homes, workers too tired to walk further. The tavern offered warmth without questions. No one hurried anyone out. Time was not measured closely. There were no clocks on the walls. The night belonged to itself. People drifted between awareness and rest, listening to the soft sounds of fire, footsteps, and distant wind outside. Drinks were poured more slowly now. Cups stayed half full for long stretches of time. Conversations lost direction and became simple observations about the weather, the road, or the coming dawn. There was comfort in this simplicity. No one expected deep talk or strong emotion. Just being present was enough. The tavern felt like a shared shelter, holding everyone gently as the hours passed. The smell of smoke, wood, and old ale settled into the air, familiar and steady. For many, this smell meant safety. It meant they were not alone in the dark. The walls creaked softly as the building cooled. Outside, the streets emptied. Inside, The tavern remained a quiet island of warmth in the sleeping town. As you imagine this moment, picture yourself sitting there too. Your body feels heavy. The bench beneath you is hard but warm. The firelight flickers slowly. You do not need to speak. You do not need to move. The night is doing all the work now, guiding everyone toward rest. As the tavern grows quieter still, let your breathing slow naturally. Let the sounds fade into the background. In the next part, we will gently explore what happened when the tavern finally closed its doors for the night, and how people carried this quiet warmth with them into sleep. For now, remain still. Let the calm deepen. Let rest continue softly in its own time. As the medieval night grew deeper, the tavern did not suddenly become wild or loud in the way modern stories imagine. Instead, it settled into a long, heavy calm, shaped by warmth, tired bodies, and slow conversation. By this hour, most people inside were no longer seeking excitement. They were simply resting where they stood. Benches were filled with men leaning forward, elbows on rough wooden tables, mugs resting loosely in their hands. Voices grew softer, not because anyone asked for silence, but because exhaustion naturally pulled sound downward. The tavern became a place where the day finally loosened its grip. The fire near the center of the room burned low now, its flames smaller and steadier. Shadows no longer danced wildly on the walls. They moved slowly, stretching and shrinking with the gentle movement of the fire. The smell of smoke mixed with old wood, spilled ale, damp cloaks, and the lingering scent of cooked food. It was not pleasant in a clean way, but it was familiar. For many, this smell meant shelter, warmth, and the simple comfort of not being alone in the dark. People sat quietly, sometimes staring into nothing, sometimes listening to half-finished stories that faded before reaching an end. A farmer might begin speaking about the day's work, then stop mid-sentence, forgetting what came next. A traveler might rub tired eyes leaning back against the wall, letting the noise blur into a gentle background. Laughter still appeared now and then, but it was slow and brief, rising softly and fading quickly, like a sigh rather than a shout. Drinks were no longer poured quickly. The tavern keeper moved more slowly now, wiping tables that did not need wiping, stacking cups that would soon be used again. There was no rush to close. Medieval taverns did not follow strict hours. They stayed open as long as there were people who needed warmth, light, and a place to sit. Closing meant sending tired bodies back into the cold, dark streets, and that was something many avoided until absolutely necessary. Some visitors had already fallen into light sleep where they sat, heads rested against walls, arms folded on tables. No one disturbed them. Sleeping in public spaces was common, especially in taverns. It was understood that rest came where it could. A tavern was not just a place to drink, it was a place to pause, to recover, to let the body stop for a while before continuing life again the next day. The sounds inside the tavern blended into a steady rhythm. The crackle of the fire, the scrape of a bench moving slightly, a quiet cough, the low murmur of voices that no longer tried to be interesting. This rhythm made the space feel safe. Outside, the medieval night could be dangerous, cold, and uncertain. Inside the tavern, nothing new was expected to happen. That predictability allowed the mind to relax. As hours passed, fewer words were spoken. Conversations ended not with goodbyes, but with silence. People simply stopped talking. The tavern became heavier with stillness, as if the walls themselves were tired. This was not boredom, it was release. The body letting go of effort, the mind slowing because it no longer needed to watch closely. Imagine yourself sitting there now, the bench hard beneath you, the table rough against your arms, the warmth of the fire reaching your legs. Your body feels heavy, not uncomfortable, just done for the day. Around you, others rest in the same way, sharing the quiet without needing to speak. No one is watching you. No one expects anything from you. You are simply allowed to exist here for this moment, inside the long medieval night. As the tavern settles deeper into calm, time loses its sharp edges. Minutes and hours blur together. The night stretches gently forward, unhurried and patient. Soon some will rise and leave. Others will remain until morning light touches the windows. For now, nothing changes. As the night grows quiet, let the image soften. For now, remain still. Let the tavern fade slowly into darkness. Let rest continue in its own time. As the night moved deeper and the hours grew late, the medieval tavern slowly began to change its character. What was once loud and full of motion became softer, heavier, and slower. The air inside felt thick with warmth, smoke, and tired breath. Conversations lost their sharp edges. Laughter softened into murmurs. People leaned closer together, not out of excitement, but out of fatigue. The fire still burned, but lower now, its glow steady and calm, casting long shadows that barely moved. This was the quiet phase of the tavern, a time when energy faded and the body naturally drifted toward rest. Many guests no longer sat upright. Some rested their heads on their arms at rough wooden tables. Others leaned back against walls or benches, eyes half closed, mugs forgotten in their hands. There was no pressure to leave immediately. Taverns often allowed tired travelers to linger, especially if the night outside was cold or unsafe. The sense of urgency disappeared. Time felt slower here, wrapped in dim light and warmth. Even the tavern keeper moved more gently now, footsteps softer, voice lower, respecting the natural quiet settling over the room. Sleep in this space was never planned. It simply arrived. People nodded off wherever they sat, bodies heavy from drink, food, and long days of labor. There were no private rooms for most guests. Rest happened in shared space, surrounded by others breathing slowly, shifting occasionally or letting out quiet sighs. This shared tiredness created a strange comfort. No one expected silence. Small sounds were normal and accepted. A chair creaking, a log shifting in the fire, or a soft cough blended into the background, becoming part of the night's rhythm. The smell of the tavern also changed as night deepened. Fresh food scents faded, replaced by warm wood, smoke, and stale ale. These smells were familiar and grounding. For many travelers, this was the safest place they would sleep for days. Outside, the world was dark and uncertain. Inside, even on a hard bench or floor, the body could finally relax. Safety mattered more than comfort, and the tavern offered enough of both. Those who stayed awake longer spoke less and listened more. Stories faded, words became slower and simpler. Some stared into the fire without thought. Others watched shadows move lazily along the walls. Minds loosened their grip on the day. Worries lost their urgency. Tomorrow could wait. Tonight was only about rest. As you imagine this late medieval tavern, picture yourself there too. The room is warm, the fire is low, voices are quiet. Your body feels heavy and supported by stillness. There is no rush to go anywhere, no need to stay alert, just a shared night of rest among tired strangers, all carried by the same slow passage of time. As the night grows quieter now, allow this scene to fade gently. Let the warmth remain, let the stillness settle. Let rest continue softly in its own time. As the night inside the medieval tavern stretched deeper, something subtle began to change. The loud energy that once filled the room did not disappear suddenly. Instead, it softened, slowly and naturally, as if the building itself was growing tired. Voices that were once strong became quieter. Laughter lost its sharp edge and turned into low murmurs. The clinking of cups slowed. People leaned more heavily on tables and benches, their bodies relaxing after hours of standing, drinking, and talking. The tavern did not close at a set time. It simply eased itself toward rest, following the natural rhythm of exhaustion. The air inside the tavern felt warmer now, thicker with smoke and breath. Candles burned lower, their flames smaller and less steady. Shadows grew longer along the walls, moving gently as people shifted in their seats. Some guests rested their heads on their arms, not fully asleep but no longer fully awake. Others stared quietly into their cups, lost in thought, the day's worries softened by fatigue. This was a common sight in medieval taverns. The tavern was not just a place for excitement, it was also a place where tired people slowly let go. Conversations at this hour became different. The loud stories of the early evening gave way to softer words. People spoke about simple things: the weather, tomorrow's work, small hopes, small fears. There was no rush to impress anymore. The tavern became calmer, more human. Strangers felt less distant. Familiar faces felt comforting. The shared tiredness created a quiet bond between everyone still inside. Some travelers prepared to leave, pulling cloaks tighter around their shoulders, stepping carefully into the dark streets outside. Others remained, knowing they would sleep nearby, perhaps on a bench, perhaps on the floor, perhaps upstairs if they could afford it. Sleeping inside or near the tavern was common. The night outside was cold, dark, and unsafe. Inside, even on hard wood, rest felt easier. The tavern keeper moved more slowly now, cleaning when needed but not rushing. There was no sharp ending to the night, no announcement, no sudden silence, just a gradual fading of activity. The tavern breathed quietly, holding the last few guests as they drifted toward rest. As you imagine this moment, feel how gentle it is. The medieval tavern is no longer loud or chaotic. It is calm, worn, and peaceful in its own way. The fire glows low. The room feels heavy with warmth. Time stretches softly. As the night grows quieter, let us pause here. For now, remain still. Let the calm of this old tavern surround you. Let rest continue gently in its own time. As the night deepened and the hours quietly passed, the medieval tavern began to change its feeling. Earlier, it was a place of movement, voices, and steady activity. But now it softened into something slower and heavier. The fire burned lower, no longer roaring but glowing steadily. casting long shadows that moved gently along the wooden walls. The air felt warmer and thicker, filled with the smell of smoke, ale, and worn wood. This was the time when the tavern stopped feeling like a public space and began to feel more like a shared shelter from the world outside. Many of the people who remained were not rushing anywhere. These were travelers without a strict destination, laborers finished with their work, and locals who had nowhere else to go once darkness settled over the town. For them, the tavern was more than a place to drink. It was a place to sit, to rest, and to exist among others without needing to speak much. Conversation slowed and became quieter, often fading into silence. People stared into their cups, watched the fire, or simply listened to the soft background sounds of breathing footsteps and distant laughter. At this hour, the tavern felt deeply human. Tired bodies leaned into benches, feet stretched out beneath rough tables, shoulders relaxed in ways they could not during the day. Outside, the medieval world was dangerous and uncertain, but inside these walls, there was a brief sense of safety. The thick wooden door, once closed, separated the inside from the dark streets beyond. That simple barrier made a powerful difference. People slept easier knowing they were not alone. Some guests began to doze where they sat, heads lowered slowly, eyes closed without effort. No one found this strange. In medieval taverns, sleep did not always happen in beds. It happened where the body finally felt warm and still. A man might rest his head on his arms at the table. Another might lean against the wall near the fire. Snoring was common and ignored. This shared sleep created a quiet bond, a feeling that everyone was resting together, even if they were strangers. The tavern keeper moved more slowly now, no longer calling out orders or lifting heavy barrels. Cups were collected quietly. The fire was adjusted carefully to last through the night. There was no rush to close. Taverns often stayed open as long as people needed shelter. In many towns, this was one of the few places where a person could remain indoors late into the night without explanation. As you imagine yourself sitting here, notice how the pace of life feels different. Time stretches. There is no urgency, no expectation to leave quickly, just the steady presence of others, the low fire, and the sense that the night is being shared rather than endured alone. This is what made medieval taverns so important. They were not just places of noise and drink, but places of rest, routine, and quiet survival. As the night grows quieter still, the tavern settles fully into calm. The world outside fades away. Inside, breathing slows, movements soften, and the fire continues its gentle glow. In the next part, we will move toward the final hours of the night, when morning begins to approach and the tavern slowly prepares to return people back to the medieval world beyond its door. For now, remain still. Let the warmth linger. Let the quiet deepen. Let rest continue in its own time. As the night stretched deeper into darkness, the medieval tavern slowly changed its mood, becoming quieter, heavier, and more settled. Earlier laughter softened into low conversation, and the sharp sounds of mugs touching wood became slower and more spaced apart. Candles burned lower, their light warmer and less steady, casting long shadows on the rough walls. Smoke from the hearth mixed with the smell of ale, bread, and damp wool, creating a familiar scent that many travelers came to associate with safety and rest. For those who had nowhere else to go, The tavern was not just a place to drink, but a place to exist without being questioned. Many people stayed long after they had finished eating or drinking. They sat near the fire, letting warmth ease tired muscles and aching joints. Travelers rested their backs against wooden beams. Locals leaned into corners they had claimed night after night. Words became fewer, and silence became comfortable. In a medieval world filled with hard labor, cold nights, and uncertainty, the tavern offered something rare: a pause. It was one of the few places where time felt slower, where no one demanded work, and where the outside world could be forgotten for a while. As midnight passed, the tavern keeper moved calmly, clearing empty mugs and adding small pieces of wood to the fire. There was no rush to close. Many taverns stayed open as long as people remained peaceful. Sleep sometimes arrived without notice. A traveler's head would lower onto folded arms. A local would lean back against the wall and drift into shallow rest. No one complained. This was normal. The tavern accepted tired bodies the same way it accepted muddy boots and worn cloaks. For some, the tavern felt safer than home. Poor housing, shared rooms, or noisy streets made rest difficult elsewhere. Inside the tavern, surrounded by others, there was a quiet sense of protection. The presence of people, even strangers, reduced fear. If trouble came, it would be seen and heard. This shared awareness allowed the body to relax in a way that was rare in medieval life. Outside, the night air grew colder. Inside, warmth lingered. The fire cracked softly and the building settled with small sounds of wood and stone. These gentle noises blended together, creating a steady rhythm that made sleep easier. Dreams came lightly, often mixed with awareness of the room. Waking and sleeping flowed together without urgency. No one worried about time. Morning would arrive when it arrived. As you imagine this moment, picture yourself sitting quietly in the corner of the tavern. The fire is low. The air is warm. Voices are distant and calm. Nothing is required of you. You do not need to speak or move. You are simply allowed to rest. As the night grows even quieter, allow this image to soften and fade. Let the warmth remain. Let your breathing slow. Let rest continue gently, just as it did in taverns long ago, where tired people gathered not for excitement, but for simple comfort. As the medieval night moved deeper, the tavern slowly began to change its character. The energy that once filled the room softened without anyone needing to say a word. Voices grew lower, laughter became slower, and conversations stretched out with long pauses between sentences. Some guests leaned back against wooden walls, eyes half closed, cups resting loosely in their hands. Others stared into the flickering firelight, thoughts drifting far beyond the tavern walls. The tavern did not suddenly become quiet. Instead, it gently settled, like a river slowing as it approaches still water. The air inside grew warmer and heavier. Smoke from the hearth mixed with the smell of spilled ale, damp wool, and old wood. Breathing felt slow and steady, almost matching the rhythm of the fire's gentle crackle. The benches, hard and uneven, no longer felt uncomfortable. Bodies adjusted naturally, finding rest even on rough surfaces. In this world, comfort did not come from softness, but from familiarity. After long days of work, travel, or labor, simply sitting without moving felt like rest. The tavern keeper moved more slowly now. Tankards were refilled less often. Some candles burned low, their wax dripping quietly onto rough tables. No one rushed to leave, but no one felt the need to stay alert either. The tavern became a shared resting place, not just for bodies, but for minds. Worries about tomorrow were pushed aside, not solved, just gently forgotten for a while. For many visitors, this moment was the closest thing to peace they would feel all day. Homes were small, crowded and cold. Beds were simple, if they existed at all. But here, surrounded by familiar sounds and faces, the mind could finally soften. Even strangers felt less threatening in this dim, tired light. The tavern held everyone equally, offering warmth, shelter, and a pause from the outside world. As the fire burned lower, the night outside pressed closer. Wind brushed against wooden shutters. Somewhere in the distance, a cart creaked or a dog barked softly before falling silent again. Inside, the tavern felt sealed off from time. No clocks marked the hour. No one measured how long they had been there. Time was felt only through tiredness, through heavy eyelids and slow breathing. Eventually, one by one, people began to rise. Movements were unsteady but unhurried. Goodbyes were simple, sometimes no more than a nod or a quiet word. Cloaks were pulled tight, hoods lifted, and boots scraped softly against the floor. Each person carried the warmth of the tavern with them as they stepped back into the dark medieval streets. Those who remained sat quietly, letting the last moments of the night pass without resistance. The tavern did not push anyone out. It waited patiently, just as it had waited all evening. In this way, the medieval tavern was more than a place to drink. It was a shared ending to the day, a soft landing before sleep, a space where life slowed enough for the body to finally let go. As you imagine sitting there now, allow your own body to grow heavy and still. Let the warmth of the fire settle around you. Let the low voices fade into the background. The day is finished. Nothing more is required of you. For now, remain still. Let the night continue. Let rest deepen naturally. As the long night inside the medieval tavern slowly began to soften, the atmosphere changed in small and gentle ways. The fire that had burned strong earlier now glowed lower, its light less sharp and more relaxed. Shadows became longer and quieter, stretching across wooden floors and worn tables. The air felt heavier, filled with the scent of smoke, old wood, spilled ale, and tired bodies. Voices, once loud and overlapping, had grown slower and softer. Conversations drifted instead of clashed, and laughter arrived less often but lingered longer when it did. This was the hour when the tavern felt less like a place of noise and more like a shared shelter from the world outside. Many of the people who had entered earlier with energy now sat still, shoulders relaxed, cups resting loosely in their hands. Some leaned against walls or tables, eyes half closed, listening more than speaking. Travelers who had walked long roads felt the weight of the day settle fully into their legs and backs. Workers who had spent hours in fields or workshops finally allowed themselves to stop holding tension. The tavern became a place where effort ended for a while, not suddenly, but gently, as if the night itself was giving permission to slow down. The tavern keeper moved more quietly now, stepping carefully between tables, collecting empty cups, wiping spills without hurry. There was no rush to close the doors immediately. Medieval nights were long, and many people had nowhere else to go. For some, the tavern was not just a place to drink, but the warmest and safest space available. The benches, though hard, felt welcoming compared to cold streets or damp rooms. The low fire offered comfort, even as it dimmed. Food, if any remained, was simple and slow to finish. Bread torn by hand, small bites taken without urgency. Eating at this hour was not about hunger, but about grounding the body, giving it something solid before rest. The warmth of food and drink settled into the stomach, encouraging stillness. This quiet fullness made eyelids heavy and thoughts less sharp. Outside, the village or town had already grown silent. Shops were closed. Streets were dark. Only distant sounds carried faintly through the tavern walls. Inside, the tavern felt like its own small world, separate from time. For a few hours, worries about tomorrow, work, or travel faded. Not completely, but enough to allow the mind to loosen its grip. Some guests rested their heads on folded arms. Others stared into the fire, thoughts drifting without shape. A few spoke softly about simple things, familiar stories, everyday concerns. There was no performance left in these moments. No need to impress. Just quiet presence. Just existing together in the same warm space. As the night continued to thin, one by one, people began to rise slowly. Not all at once. Some wrapped cloaks tighter around their shoulders. Some stretched stiff backs and legs. Some paid quietly and stepped out into the dark. Others remained seated, waiting for the right moment to move, letting rest settle a little deeper before facing the cold again. The tavern, now calmer and slower, held these final moments gently. It had done its job for the night. It had offered warmth, company, and a pause from hardship. It did not promise comfort beyond that. But for a medieval world filled with uncertainty, this was enough. As you imagine this scene fading softly, allow your own body to feel that same slowing. The warmth, the stillness, the gentle release of effort. There is nothing left to do here. The night has carried everyone as far as it needs to. Let the sound soften. Let the fire dim. Let the room grow quiet. For now, remain still. Let rest continue in its own time. Let sleep arrive gently, just as the medieval night finally does. As the long medieval night slowly began to soften, the tavern changed in quiet ways that almost went unnoticed. The fire burned lower now, its bright flames reduced to a gentle glow that barely lit the room. Shadows stopped dancing on the walls and settled into still shapes. The heavy air, once filled with voices, footsteps, and movement, grew calmer and quieter. One by one, people drifted away, pulling their cloaks close as they stepped into the cool night outside. Those who remained sat in silence, resting their tired bodies, their cups empty or forgotten. The tavern keeper moved slowly now, wiping tables, stacking cups, and tending to the dying fire. There was no rush. The night had done its work. For travelers, this place had offered warmth, shelter, and a moment of rest in a hard world. For locals, it had been a familiar space where time slowed and worries felt lighter, even if only briefly. Now, as the night faded, the tavern returned to its quiet state, waiting patiently for the next evening. Outside, the medieval world rested. Streets lay empty. Doors were closed. The sounds of the day were gone, replaced by the soft presence of night air and distant silence. For many who had visited the tavern, sleep would come easily now, bodies heavy from drink, warmth, and long days of work. Others would lie awake in rented rooms or on straw beds, listening to the quiet, letting the night pass gently. The tavern was never just a place to drink. It was a pause in medieval life, a place where stories passed quietly from one person to another, where loneliness softened for a while, and where the weight of the world felt slightly easier to carry. When morning came, everyone would return to their lives, to labor, travel, and routine. But for these few hours, the tavern had held them all in the same shared calm. As you imagine this final moment, the fire nearly out and the room nearly empty, let the scene grow softer in your mind. There is nothing more to do here. The night has ended. The stories have been told. The warmth has been shared. What remains is quiet. As the night grows fully still, allow this medieval tavern to fade away gently. Let the wooden tables, the low fire, and the soft murmurs disappear into darkness. You do not need to remember anything else. Just remain still. Let your breathing slow. Let rest continue naturally. Thank you for walking slowly through this place in time. Good night, and sleep well.